Tibetan cavalry used extremely thick and heavy plate armor, and the armor of the White Braves was even heavier and sturdier. Not only that, their armor was also strengthened with many toughening inscriptions. This had been the reason they were able to fight against the Mamelukes of the Abbasid Caliphate. Delish! 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 On the wall, Wang Chong's forces had chosen restraint, but the White Braves down below had chosen the completely opposite strategy. A shrill whistling filled the air as a dense rain of arrows shot toward the wall. It seemed like even space itself was being torn apart. When she saw the long tears left in the wake of the arrows, even Bai Siling paled. "Careful! Dodge them!" Shouts could be heard on the walls as the clan experts, and even Bai Siling and Zhao Yadong, chose to dodge or hide from the arrows. These arrows contained an incredible power, and not even these two women were sure that they could block them. The only person who remained unmoving in the face of this violent storm of arrows was Wang Chong. His face was calm and unchanged. Boom! Hundreds of arrows with enough strength to shatter rock and bore through metal exploded toward him. But when these arrows were still several zhang from Wang Chong, they suddenly froze in the air. Bzzzt. Wang Chong blinked, and there was a cold flash of light in the darkness. Suddenly, the countless arrows around him began to rotate under the force of some invisible energy, crashing into and pulverizing each other before dropping to the ground. Even the roars from the White Braves outside grew quieter for a moment. On the walls, all the clan experts and guards looked toward Wang Chong with deep reverence. The unmoving Wang Chong amidst the rain of arrows seemed like a god, bolstering and supporting their morale. Ready! Raise the auxiliary walls. With the creaking of gears, thick and angled metal plates began to rise from the walls, protecting the people behind them. Mere moments after these plates were raised, the second wave of attacks from the White Braves arrived. Tensome White Braves were dragging a long, silvery white object. Driven by the high speeds of the warhorses, it appeared like a shooting star as it flew toward the lofty gate. Panic shout came from the wall. "Careful! It's a battering ram." At this moment, everyone could clearly see that the silvery white object had an extremely sharp tip. This was clearly a sharp battering ram of 5 or 6 zhang in length. The surface of this battering ram was covered in complicated silver patterns. Anyone in the army was familiar with these patterns as countless sharpening inscriptions. These sharpening inscriptions were always used on the best siege weapons, so that even a steel gate several feet thick could be run through. Bang! Before there was any time to think, everyone heard a massive boom. At that moment, the entire city of steel hummed and shuddered as if it had actually been struck by a shooting star. Before the effects of the first strike had faded away, another set of galloping hooves could be heard. The second silver battering ram from the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple had arrived, hurtling forward as fast a lightning bolt. Boom! A second earth-shattering crash rang out in everyone's ears. "Lord Marquis." Su Shixian looked at Wang Chong, his face ghastly pale. If these attacks continued, the gate wouldn't be able to last for long. At the start, neither he nor Chang Sanyuan had understood why Wang Chong had ordered them to retreat, but now even Su Shixian at his lowest could tell that this enemy was different from others, was no ordinary group of cavalry. No ordinary cavalry force would also bring battering rams with them while charging on the battlefield. This wave of enemies was far more formidable and prepared than he had imagined. There's no need to worry. No matter sort of siege weapons they use, they'll never be able to open the gates of the City of Steel. Wang Chong's voice was flat, neither too loud nor too soft, yet it contained an intimidating strength. The White Braves were nearly invincible in a charge on open ground, and the cavalry under him were simply no match for them. But sturdy walls were a completely different matter. Wang Chong knew what Su Shixian was worried about, but this sort of situation would not occur. The gates of the City of Steel were not made of ordinary steel, but the meteoric metal that Wang Chong had imported from overseas. No matter how many sharpening inscriptions those battering rams had or how powerful the White Braves' charge was, they would never be able to break through the gates of meteoric metal. And besides that, Wang Chong had even added many defensive inscriptions onto the gates. Yusang isn't good at manufacturing things, so they would never be able to forge such a high-level item. It must be a product of the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple. Wang Chong's mind was abuzz with activity. The regard Yusang had placed on him was constantly surpassing his expectations, but no matter what they had planned, they would never be able to succeed. The City of Steel was his dream built on his blood and sweat. In order to give himself a foothold here, he had made ample preparations. Not even the mighty White Braves would be able to break his walls. Tell Su Kai to start getting ready, Wang Chong said. Yes, Lord Marquis. A messenger quickly left with the order. Outside the City of Steel, the White Braves were only just getting started in their assault. Boom! 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 The silver battering rams struck again and again, crashing against the gates. At the same time, there was a metal clattering as 5-clawed hooks caught onto the edge of the walls. Up! With a roar, several hundred White Braves dismounted and began to climb up the walls along the ropes attached to the hooks. Everyone, come with me. Stop them. Su Shixian grimaced and unsheathed his sword, the first to emerge from the cover of the auxiliary walls and rush toward the hooks. Fully armored soldiers rushed to catch up with him. Every person outside the walls had extraordinary strength. If they succeeded in mounting the walls using these hooks and opened the gate, the more than 100,000 workmen within the city would be exposed. The City of Steel would be the site of a massacre. Clang, clang, clang. Swords hacked at the hooks, severing the ropes. Without the ropes, the White Braves dropped back to the ground. But before they hit the ground, the White Braves cast out their right hands, causing yet another set of 5-clawed hooks to latch onto the walls. The White Braves immediately restarted their rapid ascent. Sir Zhang, just when the Tibetan assault was at its most intense, when Wang Chong could see that the White Braves had packed the base of the wall, he suddenly turned his head to Zhang Shouji, who was being protected by several guards. It's about time for us to use the beehives. Zhang Shouji nodded and turned around, quickly descending the walls. Although he was only skilled in construction, Zhang Shouji had been with Wang Chong during the War of the Southwest, so he was not completely ignorant in military affairs. These people were formidable cavalry, yet they also had battering rams and hooks, tools that cavalry usually did not use. These were clearly not ordinary opponents. But no matter who they were, they had clearly underestimated Wang Chong's convictions in building his city here and the preparations he had made. Buzz! While hundreds of White Braves were trying to get up the walls along the hooked ropes, none of them noticed that a dense honeycomb of holes had appeared on the wall, 15 meters from the ground. The cold glimmer of arrows could faintly be seen within these holes. Boom! In a flash, thousands of arrows suddenly exploded from these holes, enveloping the White Braves outside. This sudden attack caught the White Braves completely off guard. Ding ding ding. Countless arrows landed harmlessly against thick armor, but tens of thousands of arrows had been fired from the wall, and there was no means of dodging them at such close distances. Plush, plush, plush. Arrow after arrow managed to find a chink in the armor, shooting into unprotected areas like the neck. Thud, thud, thud. In a flash, 30 or 40 White Braves who had been caught off guard dropped to the ground, their corpses sprinkling the battlefield. Others had their ropes severed by the sudden arrow volley and dropped to the ground. In addition, the White Braves outside the walls were also caught in the arrow volley. Squelch, squelch, squelch. 70 or 80 White Braves were shot dead. Damn it! Careful of the arrows! Howls and shouts came out of the darkness. None of the White Braves had expected such a strong volley of arrows at close range. Wang Chong's beehives had been hidden very well and given no warning, leading the White Braves to suffer more than 100 casualties. In a battle involving tens or hundreds of thousands of soldiers, this loss was insignificant, but to the 5,000 or 6,000 White Braves, this was no small wound. Raise shields! Defend! At this moment, the ferocity of the White Braves revealed itself. Despite the furious volley of arrows, not a single White Brave retreated. In the dim light of the fires, the White Braves lowered their bodies and reached under their horses. When they stood up again, they each clutched a thick plate shield in their hand. The shields were raised into the sky, and in the blink of an eye, they were linked into a massive wall that blocked all the arrows. Everyone, get up there and open the gate. Attack the City of Steel. someone who appeared like an officer of the White Braves harshly shouted. The moment he finished speaking, even more hooks crossed the 40 meters of distance to latch onto the wall. Not only that, under the rain of arrows, several White Braves equipped with strange armor mounted their horses and charged toward the walls under the cover of the shields. Bang! A few moments later, a crash attracted the attention of everyone on the walls. They all turned and saw that a part of the walls nearby seemed to be flaking apart. Next to this crack crouched several White Braves with unusually strong auras, who were seemingly deepening this crack. Metal Element Warriors. Chang Sanyuan's pupils constricted and he paled. Wang Chang's city of steel was extremely sturdy, but this was its greatest weakness. When going up against powerful metal element warriors, the tough walls instantly became like paper. Someone, target that area immediately. Chang Sanyuan immediately ordered over some archers, but before the arrows could land, they were blocked by the thick shields. The volley of arrows was stopped before some of the arrows could even be fired. A few of the arrows were even diverted by the metal element warriors to shoot back toward the walls. No matter how sharp the arrow, they would all be much weaker against metal element warriors. Chang Sanyuan's eyes widened, and he couldn't help but turn to Wang Chong. Lord Marquis, the enemy was far more prepared than he had imagined. If this continued, the Tibetans wouldn't even need to open the gates to create hole after hole in the walls. In the blustery winds, Wang Chong gazed at the distant furnace fires, apparently not hearing a single word. Lord Marquis, Lord Marquis. Chang Sanyuan's heart was thumping, and he couldn't help but call out a few more times. There's no need to worry. No matter how many metal element warriors they use, they won't be able to open a hole until at least daybreak. Wang Chong's voice was indifferent, his expression calm. He continued to look forward, no change on his face. Chang Sanyuan froze for a moment, upon which he finally realized that though Wang Chong had not said anything, he was keeping note of every shift on the battlefield. But what surprised Chang Sanyuan the most was still Wang Chong's last few words. Everyone knew the power of metal element warriors, so Chang Sanyuan had no idea why Wang Chong was sure that they wouldn't be able to break through the walls. Yes, Lord Marquis. Though doubtful, Chang Sanyuan managed to suppress his worries. On the other end, Wang Chong had perceived Chang Sanyuan's doubts, but he chose not to explain. This city of steel had been constructed using an immense amount of gold, an expense that many people couldn't possibly imagine. If anyone believed that this was a city made of pure metal, then they were making a grave mistake. In the lowest layer of the wall, Wang Chong had installed far too many large-scale defensive inscriptions, toughening inscriptions, and even repulsion inscriptions. Besides that, Wang Chong had also added thousands of small-scale inscriptions. Without exaggeration, one could claim that this steel was even more valuable than gold. If metal element warriors wanted to break these walls, it wasn't impossible, but the time and energy they would need to pay would definitely be far more than they expected. Just like Wang Chong had said, on the basis of the enemy's abilities, they wouldn't be able to get through the walls before daybreak. So Wang Chong wasn't concerned at all. Wang Chong was currently worried about something else. Something's wrong. What are you thinking? Wang Chong squinted into the distance as he inwardly muttered to himself. Cavalry was meant for charging on the battlefield, not assaulting a city. Even though they had brought battering rams, ropes, and hooks with them, it was still a waste of skills. Since his enemy had made so many preparations, even wrapping the hooves of their mounts, they should have understood that these methods would not be able to break the gate. The problem then was, what exactly was the enemy's goal? Or to put it differently, what was the true target of their attack? Wang Chong had been hailed as the war saint of the Central Plains, and he had even played with renowned figures like Huashu Huizong and Daluan Ruozhen in the palm of his hand. No plan or tactic could hide from his eyes. Wang Chong could clearly sense that something was wrong. Clang, clang, clang. He suddenly heard the sharp ringing of metal. The first batch of White Braves had finally succeeded in getting past the 40 meters of distance and the rain of arrows to mount the wall. Rumble. There was a metal clattering as pitch-black war halos began to resonate and shimmer beneath their feet. A wave of energy exploded, sending the guards on the wall screaming into the air. The warriors of the steppe, the strongest cavalry of Yusang, were finally revealing their powerful cultivation. Each of the White Braves had reached Tier 1 or 2 of the profound martial realm. Although these White Braves had been trained using the secret arts of the Great Snow Mountain and could not compare to the profound martial generals in the army, they were completely capable of crushing the elites of other armies. The various great clans had dispatched their best experts to protect the city during its construction, but they were simply no match for the White Braves. Don't panic. Work together and attack as one. Not good. They're far too powerful. Ah! Screams filled the air. Although the experts from the clans had attempted to attack in groups, it took mere moments for the stalwart White Braves to send them flying. Kill! Kill! Roaring in Tibetan, the White Braves, who were usually tasked with guarding the royal capital and protecting the Tsenpo, displayed their crushing power. Like tigers amongst sheep, they began to wreak havoc amongst the guards. Not a single person on the walls was able to take a single blow from them, causing the people within the city to pale. Just who are these people? They're just ordinary soldiers. How could they be this powerful? Every person had been given a deep shock. They all knew that the guards on the walls were well-trained and possessed abnormal strength. They usually only needed a few moments to gather together, and whenever they walked, they always had an erect posture, brimming with vitality. Those workmen hiding in the city who had originally believed themselves to be very safe began to panic. As the White Braves charged up the walls and seemed on the verge of opening the gates, the only person who remained calm was Wang Chong. It's about time, Wang Chong quietly said to himself as he stood on the city wall. His expression was calm, as if everything was proceeding as expected. It seemed like nothing in the world could affect him. Nothing in the world could exceed his predictions. Rumble! There was suddenly a deafening boom. A group of 20 to 30 soldiers, dressed in black armor, strode out from the shadow of the walls, their gaze sharp and their strength not one bit inferior to the White Braves. A man of around 30 years, who seemed to be the leader of this group, stood at the head of this force. He drew a wood steel sword and harshly shouted, "Get ready! Attack!" Clang, clang, clang. Each of the soldiers drew their own wood steel sword, the sharp tips aimed at the sky, a dense forest of swords glimmering in the starlight. Boom! In the blink of an eye, this group of soldiers had assumed formation and begun charging toward the White Braves on the wall. As they charged, halos of thorns began to emerge from their bodies, one halo after another spreading beneath their feet and strengthening them. Bang! Stellar energy exploded and waves of energy churned. The two sides were quickly engaged in a fierce melee, filling the air with the clashing of metal and explosions of sparks. The unstoppable White Braves suddenly found themselves facing formidable resistance. Not only were they facing opponents of similar levels of strength, these opponents had wood steel swords that could cut through iron like mud. The White Braves on the walls found themselves being forced back and began to pale. Kill them! Su Kai's voice rang out, and the black-armored warriors quickly paired up, each pair becoming a small formation. The first would slash at the enemy's right or left arm, while the second would aim for the head. One by one, the White Braves began to fall. On this trip to the City of Steel, Wang Chong had only brought 20 to 30 profound martial elite soldiers with him. Unlike the other elites, these were the best of the best. Wang Chong had used the combined influence of King Song, Zhangqiu Jianxiong, Shenyu Zhongtong, his father Wang Yan, and his grandfather Wang Jiling to transfer them here. In the City of Steel, the soldiers led by Chang Sanyuan and Su Shixian were only the first line of defense. The walls of the City of Steel could be considered the second line. As for Su Kai's soldiers, they were equipped with meteoric metal armor and wood steel swords, and each of them was at the profound martial realm. They were the third line of defense. Wuxiang had a complicated terrain and was surrounded by many factions, and it was hard to say that one would encounter ordinary warriors every time. If some experts were to attack, experts of the same level were needed to combat them. It was for this reason that Su Kai's group had been formed. Everyone, get ready! On the other side, Chang Sanyuan and Su Shixian were growing increasingly nervous as more and more White Braves mounted the walls. Clang! With a furious roar, Chang Sanyuan and the others drew their swords. Taking up a simple formation of 6 or 7 people, they charged toward the White Braves. Bang bang bang. The two sides were instantly engaged in combat. Although the White Braves were powerful, they were much less formidable than the formation containing Chang Sanyuan and Su Shixian. Squelch. Swords plunged through the necks beneath the chinks in the armor, stabbing into flesh. The White Braves began to fall, their eyes wide open and their bodies twitching. In a one-on-one battle, none of Wang Chang's soldiers were a match for the White Braves. But if they worked together, it was the White Braves that were no match. And in the end, the White Braves were still cavalry. By forsaking their warhorses and climbing the walls, they had given up their largest advantage. But for the White Braves, the true sound of death was still coming. Everyone else, stand aside. 30-some zhang from the most intense area of fighting. Several black-armored soldiers kneeled on the ground. The swords in their hands pointed straight ahead. Ready! Fire! Twang! A bowstring vibrated and there was a massive boom as a long black arrow pierced through the air, instantly crossing the 30-some zhang of distance. It struck a White Brave who had just climbed onto the wall, the enormous power bringing him over the wall and plunging him into the darkness. A stalwart White Brave on the wall saw the large machine next to the black-armored soldiers and immediately paled. Ballisti! Careful! On the battlefield, ballisti would always be one of the greatest threats to cavalry. No matter how many toughening or defensive inscriptions were added to their plate armor, they would never be able to stop the nightmarish ballisti. No one could have imagined that Wang Chong would use these inflexible, direct-firing, and rather inaccurate ballisti to defend the walls. In contrast to an open battlefield where two armies clashed, the walls of the City of Steel were narrow, with no space to turn around. In addition, the distance of 30-some zhang was far too little for the White Braves to dodge the bolts. Dodge! Careful! The White Braves were all astonished and startled. Although Wang Chong only had 4 ballisti on the walls, the terror of these 4 ballisti was far more than any number of soldiers could bring. Anyone struck by a bolt was certain to die. All the White Braves instantly felt a helpless fear and found it difficult to fully utilize their strength. Rah! Let me do it. I'll kill them all. A White Brave growled in Tibetan, his expression savage as he pulled out his scimitar and leapt forward. He wanted to convert his extreme speed into a jump that would bring him to the black-armored soldiers so that he could kill them all and destroy the ballisti. But the White Brave could only make it several zhang before. Boom! A pitch-black bolt thundered through his chest, sending his corpse flying and bringing it down almost 100 zhang past the wall. Next one. Ready! The officer commanding the 4 ballisti had an ashen complexion, but he remained extremely calm. After shooting down that White Brave, he immediately ordered for the next bolt to be loaded and aimed for the next shot. The soldiers operating the ballisti seemed ordinary, but they were all elites that Wang Chong had selected from the Annan Protectorate. They were also involved in one of Wang Chong's new ballista experiments. The greatest flaw of ballisti was the fact that they could only fire straight and lacked flexibility, making them very easy to dodge. Moreover, the manufacturing costs for the ballista bolts was extremely high. Thus, Wang Chong was attempting an experiment. He had selected the soldiers from the army who displayed incredible talent in operating ballisti and formed them into small teams. In this way, he could somewhat resolve the problem of accuracy. In addition, this team of talented ballista operators would be able to display the might of the ballisti to their maximum extent. From the current situation, it seemed like Wang Chong's experiment was bearing results. The only problem was that ballisti were still a weapon under the control of the imperial court. Wang Chong could construct as many ballista bolts as he wanted, but he could not do the same for ballisti. Even transferring these 4 ballisti had required Wang Chong to use King Song's influence in the court and a special application. Twang! Boom after boom filled the City of Steel, echoing far into the darkness. There might have been only 4 ballisti on the walls, but operated by those ballista teams, they fired very frequently. The frequency of ballista fire made it seem like there were 30 or 40 ballisti rather than just 4. The White Braves on the wall were almost completely suppressed. A few of the White Braves attempted to use other soldiers to cover them, but it was clear that all the White Braves had underestimated the accuracy of these 4 ballisti. Once the ballisti were visually calibrated, the White Braves would be shot the moment they revealed themselves. The appearance of these 4 ballistae instantly altered the course of the battle on the walls. Wonderful! I knew Lord Marquis would have a way. No wonder Lord Marquis didn't move. He already predicted all this. Haha, Lord Marquis is a divine strategist. Not even the Tibetans or Mengshi Zhao were a match for him. I was just saying that these enemies could never stop him. Hee. And just who was trembling in fear just now? The more than 100,000 workmen had been silently observing the battle from within the city this entire time. When they saw this sight, they instantly became confident. Wang Chong was the nail that kept the entire city of steel firm. Although they had all been somewhat dissatisfied to see Wang Chong just standing on the wall, by now no one dared to doubt him. In the distance, Wang Chong's back was illuminated in the swaying light of the fires, his clothes flapping in the wind. At this moment, the crowd saw Wang Chong's back as a majestic and stable mountain. Plans made in the tent can decide victory 1,000 li away. Whether it's the southwest or the northwest, no matter what it is, as long as he wants it, nothing can escape his grasp. It's no wonder so many great clans in the capital want to build relationships with him, giving him whatever he wants, whether it's people or money. Because if they follow him, they'll always be able to succeed. While the workmen in the city were chattering, nearby, no one noticed that Zhang Shouji was silently watching Wang Chong, mentally sighing in emotion. Of all the craftsmen, he had been the first to follow Wang Chong and had experienced life and death with him. Thus, Zhang Shouji had a rather good understanding of Wang Chong. But the more he understood Wang Chong, the more admiration and respect Zhang Shouji felt for this teenager. The intelligence and resolve he had shown far surpassed his age. The more one interacted with him, the more one would trust him, would want to follow and assist him. On the walls, Wang Chong had no idea what these people were thinking. His thoughts were on the strategic level, far above the battle before him. It's about time. Just where is it? Wang Chong's mind was currently whirring with thoughts. No matter how formidable the White Braves were, using them to besiege a city was putting the cart before the horse. So Wang Chong had never regarded them as a true threat. His thoughts were on other matters. Did I overestimate them? Someone who could think about using cloth to wrap hooves and bring battering rams from the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple shouldn't be an ordinary opponent. Just what are you up to? Wang Chong's brow furrowed as he silently thought. From the very start, he had noticed that something was wrong. Ding ding ding. A metallic clattering rang out in his ears, and Wang Chong focused. In front of him, several hooks had flown up and latched onto the wall. In just a few moments, there was a roaring at his ears as red-eyed White Braves began to climb up the walls and appear before Wang Chong. Without a word, the White Braves pulled out their scimitars and began to hack down at Wang Chong. Humph! Not knowing your own strength. As Wang Chong broke his train of thought, he sneered. It was true that each White Brave was a profound martial expert, armed to the teeth and with incredible defensive capabilities. But even though they could contend against the powerful Mamelukes, they were just grasshoppers trying to stop a carriage to him. Against these charging White Braves with eyes of bloodlust, Wang Chong didn't even move, allowing them to slash at him. Boom! 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 Each White Brave slashed with all his strength. Thunderous blows aimed at Wang Chong. A full-strength blow from these White Braves could even cleave apart mountains. But against Wang Chong, their scimitars seemed to strike an invisible wall several zhang out and were frozen in the air. What's going on? What evil art is this fellow using? Why can't I move my scimitar? Pull it back. Back. Everyone work together to kill him. He can't deal with all of us. The White Braves were both shocked and furious, caught completely off guard by this sight. Not in all the battles they had participated in had they seen a sight like this. But what frightened them the most was that flat and unconcerned voice. Is that so? These words were not spoken in Han, but in the Tibetan that they were all familiar with. It's that Han. All the White Braves stared in fear at Wang Chong, and when he raised his head to look at them, all of them felt an ill foreboding. Run! Run! One of the Tibetans shouted out, and in the blink of an eye, all of them felt an intense danger that made their scalps go numb. Driven by some instinct, they abandoned their scimitars and fled, but it was already too late. Boom! Wang Chong blinked, and there was a cold flash of light. A powerful energy instantly began to pull all the white braves back toward Wang Chong. Careful! My stellar energy! He's absorbing our energy! Evil art! He knows evil arts! Ah! The strongest warriors of the Tibetan plateau were now in complete panic, a primordial fear emerging in their eyes. Before the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art, the white braves were helpless, unable to even move a muscle as their stellar energy flooded out of them and surged into Wang Chong's body. Not only that, even their thick plate armor, inscribed with so many defensive and toughening inscriptions, began to twist, crumple, deform, and constrict under the force of Wang Chong's technique. Ah! There was a short burst of screams before all 8 of the white braves were compressed into balls of flesh and metal, dropping around Wang Chong. The battle had begun quickly and ended even more quickly. 8 fierce white braves had not even managed to get close to Wang Chong before having all their energy absorbed and being killed. Seeking your own deaths. Wang Chong didn't even glance at the remains as he quickly collected himself. With his current level of strength, even ordinary Saint martial experts were no match for him. As soon as he had the chance, he could suck them dry of energy. These white braves were only at the profound martial realm. Wang Chong didn't even need to move for those white braves to all die around him. With a wave of his sleeve, Wang Chong sent the corpses of the white braves rolling over the wall and down below. Rumble! Just when Wang Chong was beginning to move his attention to scan the area, it happened. Without the slightest warning, an earth-shattering boom came from within the city of steel, followed soon after by miserable screams. Ah! Shit! It's a spy! A Tibetan! Save me! Save me! My leg! Run! Run! The originally calm city instantly turned into mayhem, with screams, explosions, pleas for mercy, crashes, and waves of energy adding to the din. In just a few moments, the atmosphere in the city of steel had completely transformed. The controlled situation had suddenly become fraught with tension, and countless more variables had appeared. This is impossible. The great Tang warriors on the wall were trembling in fear as they turned in shock toward the screaming below. Wang Chong himself had turned around even more quickly. For a single moment, the entire wall was quiet, as still as a grave. Even the black-armored soldiers operating the ballistae couldn't help but turn and look in shock. The city of steel was the most defended place in the region of Wuxiang, and no place in the city of steel was more heavily guarded than the inner city. In addition, all the workmen and craftsmen taking part in the construction were Han. Not a single one was Hu. Moreover, all of them had their backgrounds and families registered in the Bureau of Revenue, verified by the officials and great clans in the capital. Besides that, all of the workmen had crew leaders, the crew leaders had foremen, the foreman had chief foreman. There was layer after layer of accountability, making it simply impossible for outsiders to sneak in. The city of steel was also guarded by several thousand guards and cavalry that maintained a perimeter 10 li out from the city. One could say that even though Wang Chong's city of steel had many people, it was probably the hardest place in the western regions to sneak into. In addition, Tibetans looked completely different from the Han. Even if the white braves were taller than the average Tibetan, they still had very different physical features. Just the red blush characteristic of the plateau on their faces made them easy to pick out. This was not something that could be hidden by a taller body. Just how had these Tibetans managed to sneak in? Over there. At this moment, no one was more composed than Wang Chong. Although he was surprised at the start, he suddenly felt like he had found the answer to all his questions. From the start of the battle, Wang Chong had never been able to clear up a single problem. Why were these people so confident that they could break the city of steel? Just by relying on these battering rams and hooks? Assaulting a city was completely different from a battle on the open field, and such methods were meaningless. Only when he heard the screams from within the city did Wang Chong finally understand. The opponent this time was far more difficult to deal with than he had imagined, and far more frightening. Although Wang Chong still didn't know exactly how it had been done, there was no question that his enemy had managed to pass the many safeguards of the city of steel, and had also succeeded in altering his appearance enough to sneak into the city. These spies hidden within the city were his enemy's true trump card. I truly want to know just who is the leader of this attack. Wang Chong quietly said to himself, his eyes turning cold and sharp. He had encountered his fair share of renowned Tibetan generals. Whether it was the slain generals Tumi Sangza, Longqinba, or Jiasiluo, or the even higher-ranked Huashu Huizong and Daluan Ruozhen, he knew the style of these generals like the back of his hand. But this Tibetan general had a completely different style. The muffled hooves, the feint attack, the plate shields, metal element warriors, hooks, battering rams, infiltrators within the city, and even attacking by night to avoid being observed by birds. Wang Chong had never encountered any Tibetan general who used such tactics. This was a complete departure from the straightforward nature of Tibetans, and in some aspects, this general was even craftier than some of the generals of the Central Plains who were well-versed in military strategy. Not even the fox of the battlefield, Yao Guangyi, could compare to this mysterious commander. Wang Chong found it very hard to recall a Tibetan general that was this hard to deal with, but the urgent task at hand was to take care of the mayhem in the city. Otherwise, the massacre of the powerless workmen would lead to such chaos that the gates might end up falling. Buzz! Without any time to think carefully, Wang Chong leapt off the walls. But the moment he jumped, he suddenly felt a strange sensation behind him. What originally felt like a wheat bristle instantly began to expand, turning into a furious storm in a split second. Hey! I've caught you! An indifferent and cold laugh faintly echoed in his ears like a joke from the god of death. Although he could see nothing, Wang Chong immediately felt an intense danger. Not good. Wang Chong paled. His enemy had remained hidden here for some time, concealing his energy and waiting like a venomous snake. Only when Wang Chong was focused on the distant turmoil and revealed a flaw had he suddenly struck. And this strike was a fatal one. Not since his reincarnation had Wang Chong encountered such a sinister, cunning, and lethal foe. Bang! There was no time to think. An enormous storm of stellar energy exploded from Wang Chong's body, and he immediately pushed the great yin-yang heaven creation art to its limits. Visions of the sun and moon appeared on Wang Chong's shoulders. Boom! A sharp bolt of energy, imbued with a destructive energy, swept past Wang Chong's original position like a sharp arrow. It continued to travel for several hundred zhang, twisting the air in its wake until it eventually landed 100 zhang from the gate in a fierce gale. The intense winds pounded against the gate, causing it to bang and rattle, and filling the defenders with fear. On the other end, Wang Chong had turned to look after barely dodging the strike, and the sight left him astonished. Brat, your reaction's rather good. You actually managed to dodge that. In a place close to Wang Chong's original position was a muscular and barbaric silhouette standing like a god. His right hand holding a black and red spear, more than 1 zhang long and thicker than a child's arm. His gaze was cold and arrogant, brimming with disdain. It seemed like nothing in the world was worthy of his acknowledgement, much less able to stand on the same level as him. But the most frightening of all was the savage, ruthless and murderous aura seething around him. It was like he existed solely to destroy all things of this world. Wang Chong had seen many experts, but never one as savage and dreadful as this. More like a crazed demon than a human. He was bursting with an intense desire to kill and destroy that he had never encountered in any other expert. Just who are you? Wang Chong looked gravely at that insane demon of a man, his mind in turmoil. This person was crafty and cunning, well-versed in the ways of strategy and tactics. And he was also patient and skilled in concealment. All this plus that thick killing intent that could only have been refined through mountains of corpses and seas of blood had completely upset Wang Chong's traditional impression of Tibetan generals and experts. It was enough to leave a deep brand on anyone's mind. Leave them a sight that they could never forget. Powerful foe. Unquestionably powerful. Wang Chong knew that he had made an extremely terrifying opponent in the northwest, one that he had no recollection of. No. As his gaze passed over that black and red spear that seemed to want to even pierce the heavens, Wang Chong's eyes widened as his mind recalled a single person. The northwest was a complicated land. Yusang, the Great Tang, the Western Turks, the kingdoms of the western regions, and also the Abbasid Caliphate, Karak-Spazinu, Sindhu. Various factions intersected here, engaging in fierce combat every month. While determining a person's identity through their killing intent wasn't exactly difficult, it wasn't that easy either. But if one added to that the demonic spear that was so rarely used in the western regions in his right hand, the task was no longer very challenging. At the very least, Wang Chong's mind was able to quickly produce a result. It's him! Wang Chong's eyes widened as his face turned even graver. Thick killing intent, cunning and hard to deal with, proficient in military strategy, Tibetan, black and red spear. When these bits of information were gathered together, a name immediately leapt out to Wang Chong. Dian Mangban, a brigadier general of Yusang and a future imperial great general of illustrious name. For a time, his reputation had even surpassed that of traditional Yusang great generals like Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Huaitsong. He had even nipped at the heels of the king of generals Huitadra Konglo, and was called Huitadra Konglo's successor. There was a period when this man was the most threatening existence to the Tang in its waning days, because he was mad, dangerous, bloodthirsty, yet also extremely intelligent. Most importantly, he had a very carefree way of thinking, and it was impossible to predict his actions using common sense. His bloodlust and madness meant that he would heedlessly and crazily do things that no normal person would do, and his incredible intelligence meant that every time he did strike, he would present a massive problem and threat to his opponents. He had fought with the Turks, the Arabs, the Caracenians, the Sindhi, the Great Tang. The list of his targets was extremely long, and there were times when he even crossed one country to attack another. If not for the otherworldly invasion, Dian Mangban would have been the #1 target of the various factions in the northwest. But these were not the reasons Wang Chong knew of him. Rather, Wang Chong clearly remembered that Dian Mangban was one of the two critical figures behind Qixi Protectorate's lack of soldiers. And the renowned White Braves of Yusang just so happened to be one of the armies he had led. And when the Mamelukes of the Abbasid Caliphate advanced on the plateau and were given a heavy blow by the White Braves, Dian Mangban had been the Tibetan commander. So it was him. Wang Chong clenched his fists, his killing intent swelling. Whether it was for the Great Tang or the 30,000 soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate Army, Wang Chong had to eliminate Dian Mangban. And it was at precisely this moment that he heard that familiar voice ringing in his mind. Impromptu mission. The threat to Qixi, the star of an enemy general, is slowly rising over the plateau, appearing in the skies of Qixi. This is a general star that exists purely for slaughter and death. A loathing and a desire to destroy all things shrouds his heart. Only war can soothe his cravings, can make him feel joy and excitement. This is a threat to the empire and even more a threat to Qixi. User has 3 months to destroy this general star of death. Otherwise, Qixi will be the first sacrifice to fall under his iron hooves. Mission completion will be rewarded with 400 points of destiny energy. Failure will result in a penalty of 2,000 points of destiny energy. This mission is not optional and cannot be abandoned. The 3 months begin now? Wang Chong momentarily froze upon hearing the voice. He had never expected the Stone of Destiny to issue a mission targeted at Dian Mangban. Moreover, unlike other missions, this mission would not result in his death, but failure would result in a deduction of destiny energy as a penalty. Moreover, the penalty for failure was 5 times the reward. This also meant that in rewards and penalties, the Stone of Destiny favored heavy penalties so as to compel him to complete the mission. In addition, he was given only 3 months for this mission. It doesn't matter how much time is given or how much destiny energy will be deducted, because I'll be personally killing him. The thoughts quickly flitted out of his mind, and Wang Chong's right hand reached for his sword. Clang! His Wut's steel sword was unsheathed, glimmering with cold and dazzling starlight. Wang Chong straightened his body, his eyes locking onto the nearby Dian Mangban as a will to fight exploded out. The White Braves outside the city were no longer important. As long as he could kill Dian Mangban, the battle would come to an end. Ha ha ha! Interesting. You're actually challenging me. A crazed laughter rang out over the city of steel. In the darkness, Dian Mangban's eyes shone with an odd light as he took measure of the sword in Wang Chong's hand. Black and red spear in hand, long hair blowing in the wind, He seemed in the darkness like a dreadful demon god. You've already attracted my interest. I had originally come to end you because the Tsenpo ordered me to, but now I've changed my mind. Even without the Tsenpo's order, I still must kill you. Ha ha ha, an interesting prey. Don't disappoint me. Dian Mangban's lips slowly curled into a cruel smile. At this moment, everyone nearby couldn't help but feel a deep chill in their hearts. But before anyone could react, Dian Mangban was lunging forward in attack. Rumble. There was a heaven-shaking boom as Dian Mangban's spear jumped like a carp, quickly thrusting at Wang Chong. So fierce were the winds stirred by the thrust of this spear that the wall began to clatter as if unable to endure its might. And in a radius of 20 zhang from where Dian Mangban's spear stabbed down, all the stairs, steel railings, wooden boards, steel bars, and even the crane were twisted apart, their fragments showering down like a rain of pear blossoms. But even though Dian Mangban was fast, Wang Chong was even faster. The moment Dian Mangban had struck, Wang Chong's body had swayed, and he took off into the air, avoiding Dian Mangban's blow by a hair. But Dian Mangban had sensed this. His eyes squinting and his back to Wang Chong, he immediately thrust his spear behind him. Rumble. Wherever Dian Mangban's spear struck, massive waves of energy would push out even the air, leaving a true vacuum. This tyrannical spear could even crush the steel walls, let alone the human body. In a flash of cold light, Wang Chong's wood steel sword moved with deceptive speed, striking the tip of Dian Mangban's spear. The clash of spear and sword caused shockwaves that knocked over a 10-meter-tall crane several dozen meters away and sent the wooden crates scattered around it toppling over in disarray. Nearby, the soldiers and white braves caught up in the battle between this pair had no time to react before they were whisked off their feet by the furious winds and slammed against the outermost steel walls. Wang Chong had a much faster reaction. Though he was sent flying through the air like a kite with a broken string, after several zhang, all the energy of the impact vanished. Wang Chong flipped in the air and gently floated down to another wall 10 some zhang away. From how he landed, it could be seen that Wang Chong had actually come away unharmed from the exchange. What sort of martial art is this? Dian Mangban had originally intended to pursue, but when he saw this sight, his pupils constricted and he immediately stopped. In that exchange of blows, he had clearly sensed that this great Tang youth was weaker than him. But for some reason, when they had clashed, more than half of the energy he had used had been somehow absorbed. Wang Chong did not answer. He stood with one foot on an erect banister on the steel wall, no emotion visible on his face. In that clash, he had already gotten a rough sense of Dian Mangban's level. As one of Yusang's future most outstanding generals, Dian Mangban had a fierce and tyrannical strength, and was brimming with a purely destructive energy. But he was still a far cry from the terrifying levels of the Dian Mangban from his last life. Brigadier General level. This was the current level of Dian Mangban's strength. He was still not as powerful as traditional imperial great generals of Yusang like Huashu Huizong and Dusong Mangpoj, but the gap wasn't that great. Those casual thrusts of his spear contained an extremely compressed energy that would only explode upon collision. There was no question that Dian Mangban was a superb master of controlling his strength. In the past, if he had encountered him, his death would have been certain. However, now that his master the demonic emperor old man had passed on to him the supreme evil art, the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art, he was capable of fighting against any expert as long as they were not great generals like Dusong Mangpoj. This included brigadier generals like Dian Mangban. Dian Mangban? Wang Chong said. Dian Mangban paused, his eyes narrowing. Initially surprised, his astonishment quickly morphed into a smile. Interesting. You even know my name. This operation was getting more and more interesting. This prey should have never been to the northwest before, but only a single exchange had been enough for the prey to recognize him. Dian Mangban found this feeling quite interesting. Then I'm right. Wang Chong nodded, his theories affirmed. Dian Mangban, it seems like your Yusang will never learn. Last time you lusted for the southwest, so I had my men spread a little something across the plateau to give all of you a little lesson. I didn't think that all of you would be so foolish this time as to intentionally provoke me. Did you know? Because of tonight's operation, Xianxia will have to completely withdraw from the western regions, and as a light punishment, the Great Tang armies will march onto the edge of the plateau and make it a new territory of the Great General. This is the price you will have to pay for tonight's operation, Wang Chong indifferently said, his voice neither too loud nor too soft, yet imbued with a persuasive strength. Buzz! Dian Mangban immediately paled. If this were anyone else, Dian Mangban would have snorted in reply. But this was Wang Chong. No one in the western regions, perhaps in the world, would dare to treat his words as idle threats. Although he was just a teenager, this youth's wisdom was forged from the blood of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and countless officers. These were not simply bold words or prideful boasting. Although Dian Mangban didn't view this youngest son of the Wang clan with much regard, that was purely from the perspective of martial arts. In terms of military strategy, however, this person could defeat Huashu Huizong and Daluan Ruozhen, and not even Dian Mangban would dare to underestimate him in this regard. Haha! No matter what you say, you should save it for if you survive. Dian Mangban's lips quickly curled back into that cruel and amused smile. Whatever Wang Chong was threatening him with was a matter for the future, but he had to die tonight. Boom! The moment Dian Mangban spoke, the air began to resound with a metallic clattering. Halos of thorns began to emerge from his body, forming circles of light on the ground. Unlike other halos, Dian Mangban's halos exuded a white light, not a black light, and had a faintly golden luster. If one looked carefully, one could even see the blurry image of a golden crown. Buoyed by these halos, Dian Mangban's killing intent soared. He was still like a demon god that had crawled out from the underworld, but there was also a tinge of the divine, of majesty. He had become like an Azura one, a king's halo. Upon seeing this golden halo, Wang Chong's face flickered in surprise. When one cultivated to a certain level of the Saint Martial realm and obtained a certain level of understanding in the martial arts one practiced, one's halos would begin to display signs not seen in other halos. The first sign was that the external halo would deepen in color and transform into the divine and majestic gold. In addition, the image of a crown would manifest in the halo, symbolizing the fact that a Saint Martial expert was a king of warriors. Not all Saint Martial experts could possess this, as it required one to reach a certain level of maturity. Wang Chong had not imagined that Dian Mangban would have reached this level. Me, Hong. Dian Mangban was pushing his strength to its limits, his mouth chanting a four-word mantra. Each of these words was imbued with endless profundity and power, and each one boosted Dian Mangban's power. Behind him, light and shadow began to intertwine, forming a golden crown that emerged out of the air, swiftly swelling and transforming into a vision of a golden mountain covered in snow. But in a flash, black smoke billowed out of it. Other than the snowy white peak, the rest of the mountain became pitch black. Ruor! As everyone looked on, a lifelike black dragon, savage, evil, and seeking the destruction of the world, emerged from behind Dian Mangban. Black Dragon Break! Shouting, Dian Mangban shot into the air, becoming one with the dragon and rushing toward Wang Chong. Ruor! As bellows shook the heavens, a black dragon split off from Dian Mangban, and then a second, a third, a fourth. A total of 9 of these savage black dragons appeared, blanketing the skies as they charged toward Wang Chong from every direction. The devil dragon art of the Great Snow Mountain. Wang Chong's eyes flashed. Raising his head to look at the 9 black dragons shooting toward him, he instantly recognized the supreme technique of the Great Snow Mountain that Dian Mangban was using. Xianxia's Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple was well known throughout the world and was the source of all Xianxia's supreme martial arts. The techniques used by the Tibetan commanders on the battlefield were intimately connected to the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple, either originating from a side branch of one of the Holy Temple's martial arts or coming directly from the Holy Temple. A few of the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple's supreme techniques were particularly well known, with the Devil Dragon art being one of them. In the myths of Xianxia, a black devil dragon once broke out of the earth and wreaked havoc over the plateau, devouring countless livestock and killing countless shepherds and warriors. None of the experts of the plateau were a match for it, and their corpses were strewn across the land. Only when the evil dragon charged to the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple and encountered the High Priest was it ultimately sealed beneath the Great Snow Mountain. It was through this ancient legend that all Tibetans knew that the Devil Dragon art was created. In his last life, Wang Chong had long ago heard of the Devil Dragon art's power. But because this supreme technique was far too murderous, very people cultivated it and he never had a chance to see it. Wang Chong had not expected Dian Mangban to be using this mighty technique. Boom! The 9 black dragons crashed down, and the banister that Wang Chong had been standing on was crushed into scrap metal. But by this time, Wang Chong had already taken off into the skies. The great Yin-Yang heaven creation art was already being pushed to its maximum extent. The sun and moon, golden and silver, sat on his shoulders. Wang Chong was also pushing out all the stellar energy he could in seething streams of energy, like thousands of dragons shuttling around his body and roaring. Boom! With a subtle shift, Wang Chong once more dodged Dian Mangban's attack. Come! Wang Chong's eyes turned cold as he jabbed out with the middle and index finger of his right hand. Instantly, a dazzling ray of white light, brighter than the sun, shot forward and toward an area 3 inches below Dian Mangban's armpit. This sword chi finally caused a slight flicker in Dian Mangban's expression. This energy gave off a feeling so sharp that it was comparable to the sharpest of weapons. Bang! Dian Mangban twisted his body and dodged, causing the sword chi to shoot past him and punch a large hole through a metal banister on the wall. Dian Mangban's eyes widened at this sight. It was well known that of all warriors, metal element warriors were the most difficult to deal with. And of all metal element warriors, those who used the sword were the most terrifying. Wang Chong was only at the Imperial Martial Realm, but this sword chi of his was infinitesimally close to the Saint Martial Realm. It could even pose a threat to someone of his level. Just how many secrets does this boy have? At this moment, Dian Mangban finally put away his disdain. If he isn't killed, he'll be a massive problem for my Yusang. At this moment, Dian Mangban recalled those words that Daluan Ruozhen had said before he was imprisoned and suddenly began to understand. But the stronger Wang Chong was and the more martial arts he knew, the more Dian Mangban wanted to kill him. Rumble! Dian Mangban raised his black and red spear in his right hand while his left hand controlled the Devil Dragon art. Pushing his movement techniques to the limit, he instantly transformed into a furious storm that swept toward Wang Chong. Boom boom boom! In a few short moments, Dian Mangban had attacked with his spear more than 10 times, each strike containing enough power to shatter mountains. Meanwhile, the Devil Dragon art was causing even more black dragons to emerge from his left hand, attacking Wang Chong from various directions as if they had minds of their own. On the other side, Wang Chong had uncharacteristically chosen to enter a fierce battle with Dian Mangban. Bang bang bang! Although Wang Chong was only at the Imperial Martial Realm, no one knew what the final result of this battle would be. Dian Mangban's body was brimming with a fierce and destructive stellar energy, but at least 40% of it was being redirected or nullified through the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art. Not only that, Wang Chong was using the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art to make his movements unpredictable. Its terrifying attractive force was not restricted to altering and restricting the attacks and movements of his opponents. It could also be used to alter his own direction and speed. The clearest sign of this was that while Wang Chong was flying through the air, he could alter his course and speed in complete defiance of gravity and common sense. Even a Tibetan brigadier general like Dian Mangban, an elite expert of the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple, found it impossible to judge where Wang Chong would be moving. All judgments and predictions were useless in front of Wang Chong. More than 70% of Dian Mangban's attacks ended up missing the mark. Boom! 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 Winds raged as waves of energy shot everywhere. Wang Chong's left hand was using the art of God and demon obliteration while his right hand was wielding his Wuxia steel sword, both his palm and sword working together with the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art, as he engaged in an intense battle with Dian Mangban. Dian Mangban was publicly acknowledged as an elite expert of the Tibetan plateau, only second to imperial great generals like Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Huaitsong. He had a deep store of battlefield experience, but Wang Chong seemed to have even deeper stores. Bang! Wang Chong slapped a palm against the thick black smoke of the stellar energy barrier around Dian Mangban. Although he hadn't cared at the start, Dian Mangban suddenly felt an extreme uneasiness. A sharp and pure energy had pierced through the barrier, heading straight for his heart. Damn it! Dian Mangban was startled. Even though he was a composed person who rarely revealed his emotions, even he couldn't suppress this sensation that made his blood run cold. His stellar energy barrier hadn't been broken, yet the energy from Wang Chong's palm strike had still gotten in, attacking his body directly. This matter was simply absurd and impossible to believe. Dian Mangban had never seen such a thing in all his life. Without any time to think, Dian Mangban brought his right hand around, using the spear to disperse the bolt of lethal energy. Brat, just where did you learn this martial art? Dian Mangban was never one to waste time on such useless words, but he truly couldn't keep this question down. The Great Snow Mountain had an ancient legacy and a collection of martial arts manuals as vast as the sea, but Dian Mangban was sure that not even the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple had such a strange and unexplainable technique. If you can last, I'll tell you. Wang Chong's body was a blur, his sword chi crisscrossing the air and sending it into turmoil. It was simply impossible to pin down his actual position. The Stellar Energy Piercer was an ability that Wang Chong had obtained from the Stone of Destiny. It wasn't very powerful, but it seemed particularly effective against an expert like Dian Mangban, who was at a higher level than him. Wang Chong had already upgraded the Stellar Energy Piercer to an astonishing level. Seeking death. At these words, Dian Mangban instantly turned furious. Do you really think I can't deal with you? Devil Dragon Slash. Roar. A heaven-shaking dragon cry resounded over the city of steel, and a roiling black smoke began to envelop the area. Dian Mangban suddenly vanished from sight, but a massive evil dragon flew out of the smoke. Boom! The moment it appeared, the dragon turned and charged at Wang Chong, its speed suddenly accelerating. This attack was far more powerful than the previous attack. Not only was it as fast as a lightning bolt, impossible to dodge, but the range of the attack was massive. Even Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes, sensing an intense danger. Leaping Dragon Art. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong used a supreme technique that very few people in this world knew. Rumble. As thousands looked on, Dian Mangban in the form of a black dragon crashed like a meteor into the sturdy steel walls of the City of Steel. Wind exploded and steel clattered with a sound that was almost deafeningly shrill. For a moment, everyone even believed that the black dragon had annihilated a part of the walls. But the City of Steel had still managed to take the blow. Not only that, everyone could clearly see a Smald rising out of the black smoke like a bird, barely managing to dodge Dian Mangban's lethal strike. Leaping Dragon Art. Using this technique, Wang Chong could spiral into the air like a coiling dragon. At Wang Chong's current level, this martial art was not that profound, but it displayed unimaginable strength at this moment, allowing Wang Chong to dodge Dian Mangban's Devil Dragon Slash. At Wang Chong's current level of cultivation, with his memories from two worlds and his experiences from his last life at the peak of the Saint Martial realm, he no longer restrained his choice techniques based on power and level. He wasn't some inflexible diehard. He would use whichever technique was appropriate for the occasion. Buzz. On the city wall below, the black smoke scattered, revealing the figure of Dian Mangban with his black and red spear. As he raised his head to look at Wang Chong high in the air, a cold light gleamed in his eyes. Where are you going? Dian Mangban stamped his foot down and took off like a furious gale. The spear in his hand even transformed into an evil dragon, sending out black coils of smoke as he pursued Wang Chong with astonishing speed. In the air, there was no place to get a foothold to weave or dodge, making one far less agile. In these circumstances, Dian Mangban couldn't possibly let his target go. But Dian Mangban had deeply underestimated Wang Chong's reflexes and speed. Buzz. His right hand snatched out at a distant wall, and without a single handhold, Wang Chong altered his falling trajectory, quickly appearing on that wall. Sanyuan Shirshian, dispatch a group of soldiers to clear up the white braves in the city, and strengthen the guard around the gate. In addition, Su Kai Guan Yu Chen Bin. Death's Scythe. Wang Chong proudly stood on the city wall, his eyes locked on Dian Mangban and exuding a cold light. The Great Snow Mountain's Devil Dragon art, a Saint Martial cultivator of the Brigadier General level, his tyrannical stellar energy, and his extraordinary experience and skill on the battlefield made Dian Mangban probably the strongest and most troublesome opponent Wang Chong had encountered since his reincarnation. His cultivation wouldn't be enough to hold down and kill this major enemy of the Qixi Protectorate. He needed to borrow the strength of others. "Yes, my lord!" Shouts came from various places on the walls. In the blink of an eye, Cheng Sanyuan Su Shixian, Su Kai, Chun Bin, Guan Yu, the officers of the City of Steel gathered and took formation behind Wang Chong. Death's Scythe. This was a small-scale joint attack formation that was used to challenge solitary elite experts. Previously, Su Shiping, Su Anduin and the others had used the formation with only 8 people. But only in Wang Chong's hands would Death's Scythe show its true power. As more and more of the elite experts under Wang Chong's command gathered, he continued to grow stronger and stronger. 14, 15, 16. The number of experts behind Wang Chong quickly doubled, and it continued to increase, quickly reaching 20 and rising. And when the number of experts behind Wang Chong reached 32, buzz, there was a flash of light and space began to twist. 32 people, or 33 including Wang Chong, formed into Death's Scythe, all of their gazes locked onto the distant Dian Mangban. The energy of these 33 people fused into one, their combined stellar energy growing even stronger. Roar! A howl could be heard, brimming with the thick stench of death. Above Wang Chong's group, a massive scythe, 3 sumjiang long and incomparably sharp, manifested in the air. And behind this scythe, a black and twisted figure, several times the size of an adult man, appeared. Bang! Dian Mangban extended his legs and landed on the wall across from Wang Chong. As he looked at that image manifesting above Wang Chong's forces, he couldn't help but pale. He had some understanding of the martial arts of the Central Plains, as Yu Sang had many spies in the Central Plains. But the formation being used here still took Dian Mangban by surprise. To put it simply, Dian Mangban had never seen this sort of formation. Yet Dian Mangban could sense that this formation was incredibly fierce. At the very least, it was not one that he could treat lightly. Dian Mangban, now we can have a good fight. Illuminated by the dim light from the furnaces outside the walls, Wang Chong stood on the wall, a thin smile finally emerging on his lips. There was still a massive gap in strength between him and Dian Mangban, so in the battle he had been very constrained. But boosted by Death's Scythe, his strength was on a completely different level. Borrowing the power of these 32 officers, he had now reached the peak of Imperial Martial Tier 9. Although he was still not at the Saint Martial realm, this was enough strength for Wang Chong to challenge Dian Mangban. Bang! With a stomp of his foot, Wang Chong shot into the air. For the first time, he was the one on the offensive. Up! Behind him, Cheng Sanyuan, Su Shixian, Su Kai, and the others shot into the air at the same time, closely following Wang Chong in attack. The greatest advantage of joint attack formations was that all the strength of the people in the formation fused together. Thus, it wasn't just Wang Chong who received a boost in strength. All the other officers did as well. Impudent! You really think that just calling over a few more people will help you out? Dian Mangban was enraged by this. An imposing Saint Martial expert was being challenged by a measly Imperial Martial expert. This was simply a disgrace. Boom! He stomped his foot down, causing a circle of black inscriptions to explode outward and the wall to tremble and vibrate. Borrowing this strength, Dian Mangban lunged toward Wang Chong's group like a furious dragon, his spear shuddering. But the result of this exchange took Dian Mangban completely by surprise. Bang! An explosion of stellar energy threw the surrounding air into complete turmoil. Ding! In this fierce battle, no one noticed Wang Chong stretch out his left hand and touch the surface of Dian Mangban's heavy and tough spear. Hum! Like a balloon being punctured, Dian Mangban suddenly lost control of his stellar energy, part of it flooding out and entering Wang Chong's body. Brat! What evil art are you using? Dian Mangban was dumbfounded. Wang Chong only sneered as he grabbed at the air with his right hand. Rumble. Another flood of stellar energy and blood energy was drawn into his body. Through the power of Death Scythe, Wang Chong's great Yin-Yang Heaven creation art had also been strengthened. A brigadier general like Dian Mangban had extremely condensed and firm stellar energy, making it much more difficult to absorb. But it was just a question of difficulty. The great Yin-Yang Heaven creation art was a legendary art of the evil path, the name of which would cause even many experts of the evil path to tremble in fear. Dian Mangban at his strongest would still be classified as normal. Buzz. Stellar energy seethed, and in a radius of several hundred zhang, the great Yin-Yang Heaven creation art began to transform the wind into furious dragons that roared and howled as they crashed against Dian Mangban from all sides. These dragons of air could do little harm to an expert like Dian Mangban, but they made him furious. These turbulent streams of wind might not have been able to hurt him, but they were a constant disturbance, affecting his ability to fight. This was incredibly dangerous. Although Wang Chong was still weaker than Dian Mangban, he was not so weak that Dian Mangban could completely disregard him. In terms of strength, Wang Chong could actually rival normal Saint martial experts, and his fighting experience and techniques gave even Dian Mangban a headache. Damn it! Damn it! Dian Mangban's long hair and beard were in disorder and a fury was welling up in his heart. He wasn't just angered by Wang Chong's strange technique that could nullify 40% of his strength, but also Chang Sanyuan, Su Shixian, and the other clowns. Su Kai, you attack above the waist. Chun Bin, attack below the waist. Shixian, you and I will attack his right ribs together. Everyone, work together and help young master. Chang Sanyuan and Su Shixian were not sitting idly by while Wang Chong was attacking. While Wang Chong was holding Dian Mangban down, the 32 officers showered down attacks on him from all sides. In normal circumstances, when Wang Chong wasn't suppressing him, he would be crushing a few of these ants every minute. But now, these ants were acting wantonly, assaulting him without any fear. Not even Dian Mangban could block 32 people, 64 hands, launching attacks from every direction. Bang bang bang. Attack after attack crashed against Dian Mangban's stellar energy barrier like a thunderous rain. Although his defenses remained solid, Chang Sanyuan, Su Shixian, and the others were forcing Dian Mangban to exhaust his stellar energy. Now that Wang Chong had used Death Scythe, the battle had become a competition of energy reserves. No matter how formidable Dian Mangban was, he was just one man, and the Tibetan plateau worshipped individual strength and valor, not joint attack formations. Although the Great Tang had battle formations like the mighty miracle god that could combine the power of tens of thousands of soldiers, even hundreds of thousands of soldiers, such a thing was impossible in Yusang. Buffoonish clowns, you're truly seeking death. Dian Mangban clenched his teeth, his eyes madly twitching. Pushing Wang Chong back, he immediately changed the target of his spear. Although it had been aimed at Wang Chong just moments ago with a boom, it suddenly shifted toward one of the officers of the Death Scythe formation behind him. As the spear struck, the air exploded with waves of energy, but the brigadier general's determined strike had unexpectedly missed. Dian Mangban, don't forget your objective. Your target is me. Wang Chong coldly laughed. His Wuxia steel sword suddenly began to ring, instantly producing thousands of sword images. Wang Chong's aura also underwent a sudden transformation, becoming a sharp and straight sword that had descended from the heavens. Art of God and Demon Obliteration. After the Southwestern War, after the game of chess underneath the scholar tree, Great Tang War god Su Xianxia had taught Wang Chong this supreme sword art. In terms of pure power, the art of God and Demon Obliteration might not have been as strong as the great Yin-Yang Heaven creation art, but it definitely ranked in the top 3. Buzz. White light exploded, and shallow tears appeared in the air, lingering and not dispersing. Meanwhile, Wang Chong's sword images had already cut through Dian Mangban's stellar energy barrier. In defiance of all reason, the intangible barrier of stellar energy had been instantly cut in two like it was a watermelon, startling Dian Mangban. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Dian Mangban's teeth were clenched, his eyes wide open. The Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple had a legacy of 1,000 years, and was the source of all martial arts on the plateau. Its long legacy was enough for it to stand on equal terms with the Central Plains. Dian Mangban had visited the sacred mountain, entered the holy temple, and met its masters. Yet he had never seen one person display so many powerful techniques. Wang Chong was clearly weaker than him by an entire realm, but he seemed to have a limitless reserve of strange techniques. That evil art that could absorb energy was astonishing enough, and now he had this kind of inconceivably sharp sword chi. People who simultaneously knew so many powerful arts were rare, even in the Holy Temple. Squads 3, 4, 7, and 12. Death's Scythe Formation. Dian Mangban, the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware that the oriole is close behind. I'll first get rid of you, and then I'll get rid of your white braves. I'd like to see then what you Sang will use to fight against me. Wang Chong's eyes were bright and fierce, as sharp as blades in the darkness, and his voice was like a peal of thunder, booming over the city. In military strategy, it was said that quality of soldiers was better than quantity. The environment of Qixi was complicated, so there was nothing wrong with Dian Mangban's use of several thousand white braves to assault the city. Purely in terms of the art of war, Dian Mangban had already surpassed many Tibetan generals, even some renowned Great Tang generals. Wang Chong had to admire him for this, even though they were enemies. Unfortunately, there was always someone better in the vast world, and Dian Mangban had run into him. As long as he could kill Dian Mangban, then to Wang Chong, fighting an urban battle against the white braves bereft of their horses would be a simple task. Wang Chong could even open up the city after killing Dian Mangban and kill all the Tibetans before daybreak. Moreover, with Dian Mangban's death, a massive threat to Qixi would be eliminated. Yes, Lord Marquis. Determined voices came from all around the city, and in a short time, the elite soldiers who had fought in the southwest formed into squads and merged their energies, becoming unstoppable floods of steel. After the conclusion of the Southwestern War, Wang Chong had engaged in a large-scale expansion of the Death Scythe formation in the army. At this moment, his efforts were finally proving their worth. Everyone, let's go and help Lord Marquis. The enemies this time are extremely powerful. Everyone, be careful. Understood. With these last words, the squads set off. Stellar energy churned as the names of various martial art techniques were yelled out. The advantage of being trained in a great clan immediately became apparent. Coiling Dragon Roar, Chi Spear Art, Consecutive 7 Execution. Each fighting squad, consisting of 7 to 10 members, launched various attacks at Dian Mangban that incessantly assaulted his barrier. Squad 3, Attack from the southwest, targeting his Mingmen Point. Squad 4, from the southeast, target his Beijing Point. Squad 7, Withdraw. Wang Chong had barely spoken when, boom! The 7th squad barely managed to avoid a destructive black dragon made of stellar energy. If not for Wang Chong's timely order, the 7th squad would have come away with heavy injuries. Continue. Squad 12, take the place of Squad 7. As he issued order after order, Wang Chong's superb ability to command revealed itself. What was a simple warrior against warrior battle had now been forcibly converted into a battle of one against many. On one side of the battle were Wang Chong and his nearly 100 elites. On the other side was the infamous Tibetan Brigadier General Dian Mangban. Dian Mangban had brought 2,000 or 3,000 white braves with him, but at this moment, the existence of the City of Steel meant that they practically didn't exist. Squads 21, 22, and 23, get ready. Enter. Wang Chong was still gathering more elites and bringing them into the fight. The area on the walls was narrow, but Wang Chong was fully using this terrain and the differences in altitude to attack. Thump, thump, thump. One squad after another answered Wang Chong's summons and entered the fight. At this moment, the only elites that hadn't been called over were the ballista teams. Twang, twang, twang. The booms were constant and unending. Wang Chong only had 4 ballistae, but he had countless bolts and bundles laid out on the ground, far more than necessary. Although Cheng Sanyuan, Su Shixian, and the other elites were now fighting elsewhere, The practiced operation of the ballistae and their innate power meant that the White Braves were still unable to make much headway on the walls. The more than 2,000 White Braves were unable to get onto the walls in large numbers, so they naturally couldn't get the gate open. Naturally, these elites of the Tibetan plateau also did not know that their commander-in-chief, Dian Mangban, was currently about to go crazy from Wang Chong's incessant assault. Damn thing! Die for me! Dian Mangban's eyes were twitching, his mind growing increasingly annoyed. Rumble! He threw his spear, not at Wang Chong, but at the Great Tang Death Scythe teams. The nature of this battle was shifting, and Dian Mangban had never imagined that these Great Tang soldiers that would usually be barely worth his time could be so annoying. It had taken barely any time for Wang Chong to summon 20-some squads, 170 to 80 soldiers. They filled the area around Dian Mangban, launching attacks at him from every direction. This was now him against Wang Chong and nearly 200 soldiers. This would have never happened normally. Anyone who would try to deal with him by slowly exhausting his energy would be so foolish as to be seeking their deaths. But Wang Chong had made this possible. Wang Chong, do you really think I can't deal with you? The great snow seals. The devil dragon destroys all. Dian Mangban's eyes turned vicious. Even he found this constant exhaustion of his energy to be somewhat unbearable. Boom! A seething black energy exploded out from him as he shot into the sky like a black meteor. Rumble! Winds howled as the black meteor reached its zenith. At that moment, all the workmen and guards in the city suddenly saw a massive snowy mountain in the sky. This snowy mountain seemed even more real and physical than the last, and even larger as well. It was more than 100 zhang tall, enough to astonish anyone who saw it. Roar! A massive dragon bellowed. Dark clouds roiled beneath the snowy mountain, and a savage and wicked dragon coiled within, its eyes red and bursting with an energy that could annihilate the entire world. Before absolute strength, all techniques are insignificant tricks. Let me show you what true strength is. Dian Mangban's voice echoed over the sky, resounding over the city of steel like the voice of a god. At this moment, the entire world was still, all being silent, all staring at the massive evil dragon, all feeling a fear that came from the darkest, deepest depths of their soul. The great snow seals, the devil dragon destroys all. This is the strongest and most profound of the devil dragon arts techniques. Dian Mangban had relied on this technique to shatter Lesser Balor, utterly destroying its fortifications and causing this minor kingdom of the western regions to submit and become a vassal of Yusang. This technique was so powerful that it could destroy everyone on the walls, including Wang Chong. Humph! Wang Chong sneered, his hair blowing in the wind as he fearlessly looked up to the heavens. Dian Mangban, your way of thinking is too simple. Who cares about the great snow mountain? Who cares about the devil dragon? Let me show you what the true martial arts of the Central Plains are like. Yin and Yang interchange, the heavens and earth reverse. Great yin-yang art. With a howl, Wang Chong suddenly gathered up all of his strength, as well as that of the 32 officers, and soared into the air like a hawk. Buzz! The illusory sun and moon on his shoulders suddenly became corporeal, turning respectively into gold and red streams of energy that began to spiral together, forming a sun-like yin-yang force field with a radius of 10 some zhang. The great yin-yang heaven creation art was not a technique purely meant for battle. Its greater purpose lay in absorbing an opponent's energy to rapidly increase a cultivator's strength. Fighting was not its primary mission, but this did not mean that it was ineffective in battle. On the contrary, the reason the great yin-yang heaven creation art was known as the supreme evil art, which made all the masters of that path quiver in fear, was precisely that it was so terrifying in battle. As the number one evil art for several thousand years, the great yin-yang heaven creation art had 3 top-notch techniques that could be used in battle. Yin and yang interchange, the heavens and earth reverse, the great yin-yang art, was one of these 3. Each of the 3 battle techniques of the great yin-yang heaven creation art had extremely harsh requirements. For example, the great yin-yang art was a technique that was specially meant for fighting stronger opponents like Dian Mangban now. But this technique still required an extremely high level of cultivation to use. If Wang Chong were not being boosted by the Death Scythe formation and had also not absorbed a part of Dian Mangban's stellar energy, he would have never reached the requirement. In addition, using the technique also required a great deal of blood energy and mental energy. One would suffer a drastic drop in strength after using this technique, so if one could not finish off their opponent, one was highly likely to end up being pursued and killed. This was why Wang Chong did not lightly use this move. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Wang Chong, cloaked in gold and red stellar energy, smashed into Dian Mangban. The sound of the collision was so massive that it seemed like the heavens were about to tear open. The sound waves were so intense that everyone felt deaf and began to see stars. Cover your ears. The nervous workmen began to put their hands over their ears. Their faces twisted into grimaces, but many more were staring at the sky with eyes wide open. Boom! 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 In the air, Wang Chong's stellar energy fiercely clashed with Dian Mangban's. Wang Chong was far weaker than his foe, but by using a strange energy, he was able to borrow at least half of Dian Mangban's energy and use it for his own purposes. This stellar energy combined with the energy around Wang Chong, transforming into a mighty flood that thundered toward Dian Mangban. Roar! The massive dragon roared and the mountain of snow crumbled. In that one moment, it was possible to hear a groan of pain. In a flash of light, a figure crashed down from the sky, falling atop the walls. Boom! At this time, everyone could clearly see that the one to drop from the air had not been Wang Chong, but Dian Mangban. How is this possible? Su Kai and the others were stunned by this sight. They had personally experienced Dian Mangban's power. That nearly 200 army elites were required to surround and attack him was testament enough to his power. When Wang Chong soared into the air, everyone had expected him to fail and had prepared for the aftermath. Yet, to their surprise, the seemingly much more powerful Dian Mangban had lost this contest of power, and it seemed like his wounds were not light. Brat, I'll give this one to you. I didn't expect you to use this sort of method, but this is far from over. I'll be coming again, and you might not be so lucky then. Retreat! Dian Mangban's voice echoed over the city of steel, brimming with savagery and loathing. Before anyone else could react, Dian Mangban suddenly jumped over the city wall and vanished. The suddenness of this left everyone dumbfounded. No one could have predicted that Dian Mangban would choose this moment to retreat. Buzz! Mere moments after he jumped down the wall, there was a flash of light, and Wang Chong floated down from the sky to the place on the wall that Dian Mangban had fallen. He looked over the wall and outside. The fearless white braves who had seemed ready to keep up the attack forever had been thrown into chaos at Dian Mangban's sudden retreat. Many of the white braves were still confused as to what was going on. They only saw Dian Mangban jump down from the wall, mount a horse, and ride off into the distance, so they followed him. The undaunted valor of the white braves had instantly evaporated. Archers! Ready! With a grim expression, Wang Chong raised an arm and gave an order. Creak creak! The archers from the great clans within the city began to jump back onto the walls and pull on their bowstrings. Bang! 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 A dense rain of arrows descended like a cloud of locusts from the beehives, installed 15 meters above the ground, bursting toward the several thousand white braves. Nay! War horses cried as they reared up on their hind legs. Some of the arrows struck the hindquarters of these horses, causing them to throw off their riders in their painful contortions, while others were struck in vital areas and dropped on the spot. Bang! At this sight and the sounds of the neighing war horses and panicked white braves, the entire city exploded with cheers. Wonderful! We've won! I just knew that with Lord Marquis here, no one could ever capture the City of Steel. The City of Steel was an ocean of cheers, and on the walls, the clan experts and soldiers from the army found themselves regarding Wang Chong with utter admiration. At the start of the assault, the archer teams from the great clans had been ready to fire a volley of arrows, but Wang Chong had stopped them. Everyone had been puzzled by this order, but now no one questioned Wang Chong's decision. Although these Tibetans were equipped with thick armor, and their horses similarly equipped, not even the formidable Tibetans could protect the hindquarters of a warhorse. This was the only weakness in their defense. This was not because the Tibetans had been careless or neglectful. The hindquarters were where warhorses excreted their waste, and there was also the long tail to consider. Armor for this area was difficult to make and very uncomfortable for the horses, and they often kicked it away. This wasn't usually any big problem, but at this moment it became the Achilles heel of the Tibetans that Wang Chong now exploited. Ni. In a few short moments, 100 to 200 Tibetans were brought down to the ground. Quickly, save them. Hearing the activity behind them, the white braves began to turn their horses around with the intent of aiding their dismounted comrades. But what welcomed them was a shower of sharp and powerful ballista bolts. Boom! A white brave who had just turned his horse around and begun to charge back had his head blown through by a ballista bolt. The Tibetan's eyes widened and his body trembled as he went rigid and toppled from his horse. Twang! One ballista bolt after another was fired from the walls. When the white braves began to flee from the walls, the 4 ballistae no longer had anything to fear and began to freely fire on the white braves. While the Tibetans were panicked and fleeing, the ballista team fired away. In just a few moments, 30 to 40 white braves who had turned around to aid their brethren were struck down. Retreat! Retreat! A white brave officer in the distance hurriedly shouted. Although they were very unwilling, the remaining Tibetans quickly took off. Lord Marquis, a good chance. Let's pursue. On the walls, Chang Sanyuan, Su Shixian and the others hurried over to Wang Chong, the joy visible on their faces. Dian Mangban had been defeated by Wang Chong and the Tibetans were in disarray. This was a superb opportunity to chase them down and expand on their victory. There's no need. Wang Chong put a stop to this idea. Now is not the time to chase them. Su Kai, take some people and finish off those dismounted Tibetans. Without their warhorses, they won't be able to run very far. With these words, Wang Chong gave a light cough, tinged with a hint of weakness. Startled, Chang Sanyuan and the others raised their heads and finally noticed that Wang Chong's face was pale, his breathing weak. He had none of the appearance of a proud victor returning from battle. Lord Marquis, they hurriedly went up to support Wang Chong. He truly deserves his rank of Brigadier General of Yusang. Future King of Generals. I underestimated you. Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he looked in the direction that Dian Mangban had fled toward. The gap in strength between him and Dian Mangban was still there, and even though Wang Chong had used the great Inyang art in the final attack and even turned a part of Dian Mangban's own attack against him, Wang Chong had still failed to absorb his energy, much less severely wound him. Dian Mangban was currently only frightened and surprised. Once he came back to his senses and realized that he wasn't as injured as he imagined, the city of steel would truly be in danger. Hurry and clean up the area. Sweep the battlefield. Wang Chong said. Yes, Lord Marquis. The officers all lowered their heads. With these words, Wang Chong jumped off the wall. In the air, he used the great Inyang heaven creation art on the wall, using the attractive force to slow his fall into a float. Ho, he's the Tang commander. Kill him and we'll have succeeded. Wang Chong had barely landed on the ground when he was greeted by Tibetan shouts from all sides. Though their warhorses had been killed, the dismounted white braves did not flee upon seeing Wang Chong. Rather, their first reaction was to pull out their scimitars and charge. Humph! Wang Chong only sneered. Without even glancing at them, he activated the great Inyang heaven creation art. 4 of the white braves were still several zhang from Wang Chong when their faces froze in shock. Their bodies trembled as stellar energy flooded out of them and into Wang Chong's body. Evil. Evil art. The white braves shuddered as they were quickly sucked dry, their corpses left to drop to the ground. Ah! Wang Chong gave a long sigh. With the energy of the white braves, he immediately felt much better. Now it's time to end this battle. Wang Chong opened his eyes and looked around at the nearby white braves. Buzz! In a flash of light, Wang Chong appeared 10 some zhang away in front of a white brave. His right hand pressed on the unlucky soldier's head. Save me! The white brave's eyes were wide open and full of fear as he was quickly sucked dry and killed. What followed outside of the city of steel was scream after scream. The murderous and fierce white braves of the Tibetan plateau had become Wang Chong's prey. This was not a battle, only a one-sided massacre. A few moments later, the battle was over. Nearly 200 white braves had added their number to the corpses outside the city. These elite cavalry, whose strength was nearly equal to the Mamelukes of the Abbasid Caliphate, were merely ants before Wang Chong. An army's advantage was in its numbers. Without an absolute advantage in numbers, soldiers fighting against an elite expert would fare little better than fighting one-on-one. 800 some zhang from the city, Wang Chong had his eyes closed in meditation, attempting to soothe his seething blood energy, when he suddenly heard a familiar voice at his ear. Lord Marquis, the battle within the city is also over. All 16 Tibetans have been eliminated and order has been restored. Our brothers have already begun to clear up the corpses. Wang Chong's eyes opened as he asked, "Have you found out how they managed to sneak in?" The city of steel had a long expanse of walls, and if one wanted to, it was completely possible to attack and enter the city from another direction. However, that was in the case of a powerful foe who was engaging openly with the defenses. But to climb over the walls and enter the city without anyone noticing or making any noise, that was simply impossible. 150,000 experienced craftsmen were in the city, and though they were normally laying bricks, placing tiles, and building the city, when a battle began, they would become 150,000 pairs of eyes. They could serve as the best scouts and lookouts. No one should have been able to sneak past their eyes and infiltrate the city. Yet it was a fact that before Dian Mangban launched his sneak attack, no one in the city had noticed anything strange. Simply put, the enemy had not climbed over the walls, but had infiltrated the city of steel beforehand. From a certain perspective, this was utterly inconceivable. Time has been short, and we still haven't had time to properly investigate. However, according to the procedure laid out by Lord Marquis, after the incident, we cleaned up the area and discovered several broken wooden chests. These chests all had a large hole, and half of the steel and building modules were missing. Behind Wang Chong, a young officer, about 28 years old, described the results of the preliminary investigation. Wang Chong's brow furrowed, but he quickly understood what was going on. I really did underestimate him. He must have done something while the products were being shipped from the capital and the provinces. This Tibetan madman seems to be a far more meticulous person than I imagined, Wang Chong quietly said to himself. In order to maintain secrecy, Wang Chong had sealed many of the modules for his city of steel in wooden chests so that outsiders wouldn't be able to tell what was inside. A large hole being made in these chests wasn't enough to draw any sort of concern, but that so many steel modules were missing completely changed the nature of the matter. There was a high chance that this was how the Tibetans had managed to sneak past his eyes as well as the eyes of the 150,000 craftsmen. I understand. Let's leave the matter there. Strengthen the guard. In addition, Wang Chong began to head back when he suddenly stopped. Have some people clean this place up. After glancing behind him for a moment, Wang Chong quickly left. The night winds howled, spreading a thick stench of blood through the air. The ground behind Wang Chong was strewn with the corpses of Tibetan white braves. Nothing came without a price. Dian Mangban had retreated, but these 200-some Tibetan elites were the price he had to pay. Gallop! The Tibetan white braves rode through the darkness, fleeing toward the Tibetan plateau. Next to Dian Mangban, a Tibetan deputy general appeared greatly confused. "Milord, what should we do now?" The deputy general's eyes were tinged with a deep worry. More than 2,000 white braves had suffered 200 to 300 losses in the attack on the city. The elite white braves had never suffered such a heavy loss before. This tiny city of steel had inflicted more damage to the white braves than entire kingdoms. At the very least, the white braves had never suffered such casualties when they attacked greater and lesser valor. And when they thought about how Lord Dusong Mangpoj was waiting at the edge of the plateau for news of their victory, the soldiers couldn't help but shiver in fear. I really didn't think that we would be defeated by that small city with only several thousand people guarding it. I didn't think that Great Tangbrat would be even more impressive than the rumors. Milord has always been a master of siegecraft, never leaving a city empty-handed. But not even Milord personally taking action could deal with that boy. And that city was incredibly tough. Zonka and Kangba with their metal element abilities can easily turn a gate into powder or transform it into a giant. This move has always been effective in previous battles, but even after working for so long, those two only managed to dig a few inches into the wall. I truly can't believe it. General has always been proud. For him to lose to this great Tang youth must be very difficult for him to accept. Underneath the starry sky, the White Braves were thinking about the battle, a variety of expressions on their faces. However, none of them dared to voice their thoughts. They had come very prepared for this operation, bringing with them battering rams from the Great Snow Mountain sacred ground, and grappling hooks for scaling the walls. They had wrapped the hooves of their horses, brought metal element warriors, infiltrated the city beforehand. Using all these methods on a city still in the middle of construction was like using a sledgehammer to swat a fly. But no one had expected their opponent to be so formidable. And even their commander Dian Mangban had lost to them. In Yusang, Dian Mangban might not have led troops in battle very often, but he had an extremely high prestige within the White Braves, no less than that of renowned generals like Huashu Huizong. In truth, Dian Mangban had used his conquest of several small kingdoms to prove himself. In those countries, Dian Mangban was even more famous than the other great generals of the empire. That he would fail in this mission was completely unexpected. Even the personal involvement of their general had failed to kill that brat. Hey, that brat is even smarter than I thought. I underestimated him. A delighted voice rang in everyone's ears. Dian Mangban was smacking his lips and grinning. His face showed no dejection whatsoever at the loss. On the contrary, it was bursting with the will to battle. My lord! In a flash, everyone was stupefied. They had predicted all sorts of reactions from Dian Mangban, how he would express his dejection and dismay, but they had never expected this. Hey! Dian Mangban continued to chuckle to himself, his mind on the just concluded battle rather than his subordinates. His mind was abuzz with thoughts. It had been ages since he had encountered such an interesting foe. Dian Mangban could sense that his opponent was clearly weaker than him. Normally, his first strike from his hiding spot would have settled things. But this fellow had been extremely sensitive, and the blow had missed. This had never happened before. Dian Mangban had originally wanted to prevent Wang Chong from hiding himself in the crowd, using the more than 100,000 craftsmen as a shield to avoid battle, or even abandoning the city as a whole and fleeing. Such actions would make the operation meaningless. Thus, a brigadier general like Dian Mangban had not used his strength to kill his way into the city, but chosen to silently hide nearby for the right moment to strike. Dian Mangban had used sneak attacks like this many times to deal with small kingdoms in Yusang's periphery like Little Balor. The enemy commanders would often die before they were even able to see who their opponent was. But Dian Mangban's plans had encountered an unexpected roadblock. Everything had been going smoothly, and Wang Chong had had his attention drawn away by the soldiers in the city as planned. But then, the operation failed. Not since Dian Mangban had left the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple had he encountered such a strategic and tactical genius. But this was just an accident. You won't get such a good chance next time, Dian Mangban said, his eyes cold and bright, his expression like that of a savage beast. The White Braves were skilled in fighting on an open field. In charging down the enemy, the White Braves could proudly look down upon the entire world, could contend against 5, even 10 times their number in enemy cavalry. But Wang Chong's city of steel was tough and lofty. Even a full-strength blow from a brigadier general like Dian Mangban had failed to knock over those walls that had been hastily built in a single month. This had also caught him by surprise. Dian Mangban had 2,000 to 3,000 subordinates outside the walls, but they could never get in and help him fight Wang Chong. On the other hand, Wang Chong could call over 200 some of his subordinates, divide them into squads and formations, and organize them to launch a constant stream of attacks, consuming his stellar energy. He had never encountered such a thing before. It could be said that Dian Mangban had never encountered an opponent with this kind of ability. But this only further aroused Dian Mangban's killing intent. Right now, not even the Tsenpo's order would make him put down this mission. There's no need to worry about the Tsenpo and Lord Mangpoj. I'll explain things to them. Dian Mangban gave a sinister smile as he looked profoundly into the distance. In addition, everyone should prepare themselves. We'll be putting aside the City of Steel for the time being. We'll return to the plateau in a little. Right now, follow me to the camp of the Qixi Protectorate Army. Since we can't deal with that boy from the Wang clan, we'll collect a little interest first. The soldiers around him were at first dumbstruck, but they quickly began to cheer. Yes, my lord. The thunderous hooves of 2,000-some white braves suddenly changed direction, no longer on the road back to the Tibetan plateau. This night was bound to be a restless one. Flap, flap. Not long after Dian Mangban's elite cavalry left, a messenger bird took off. This bird of pitch-black body and golden eyes flew through the air and into the main hall of the Qixi Protectorate headquarters. Buzz. At this moment, even time seemed to stop. A deathly stillness had settled over the Qixi Protectorate, as if all the air in a radius of several hundred li had been sucked out. But then, the earth began to tremble, the Qixi Protectorate began to shudder, and a roar of unrestrained fury tore through the sky. Bastard! Useless thing! You couldn't even do something as small as this. This one has made all that effort in vain. Fucking shit! An energy as vast as the mountains and seas exploded like a storm, alarming everything in a radius of 100 li. Fuming Lingcha was like a berserk beast, his hurricane of energy causing everyone to tremble in fear. Qixi bordered the Tibetan plateau, and Fuming Lingcha had taken a great risk to create an opening for the Tibetan soldiers to come through. Dusong Mangpoj was a smart man, so he should have known what he wanted. But Fuming Lingcha had never expected that after all the risks he took, the Tibetans would still fail.